founder of Grounded. I'm honored to welcome our guest for this fireside chat, David Livingston, who is the senior advisor to Secretary Kerry and President Biden with the Special Envoy for Climate. So welcome, David. Really excited to be talking to you.
Thank you so much. Great to see you, and it's terrific to have the chance to check in on what we've been doing.
Yeah, and happy World Pollinator Day. I just found out it's World Pollinator Day. A really important day as they are vital for all of our food supply.
Absolutely. Indeed, the beginning of everything, the beginning of the entire food chain. So happy Pollinator Day to you as well.
Yeah, and great to see you before you head off to Davos. Thank you for doing this. I'm sure you're super busy heading to Switzerland. But I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what led you on this journey being in climate, like a little more of the personal side to things, like your story with people, because I've gotten to know you and you're amazing. And for those tuning in, I just want to hear your perspective and why you're working on climate to begin with.
Well, thank you. I don't get the chance actually to talk about this that much, but I'll say, even though we didn't know each other, Julia, I grew up in Sonoma County, where you grew up, where your family's business is, and so I was always pretty intimately connected with nature, with the outdoors, with such a rich agricultural area, whose agricultural bounty and whose honestly the identity of the region is so intertwined with the climate. And I took that to that sense of connectedness with nature to my studies in university. I became really interested in also how these sometimes very local or at times very abstract sort of environmental and climate issues intersected with global politics. So when I was in an undergrad at the University of Southern California, I actually wrote my senior thesis on the story of Russia's tortured accession to the Kyoto Protocol, before even a thing. And there's a really interesting kind of background about the political economy of whether Russia would join the Kyoto Protocol or not, and how that played out within Russia's own domestic political system. And so I wrote this very esoteric sort of, senior thesis on that. I never thought that it would become relevant again. But then years later, I ended up, going to grad school to actually study climate science and policy even more. I ended up in Washington, D.C. on a fluke, even after thinking that I was going to stay in California to work in the solar and renewable energy sector there. And it was in Washington, D.C. that I ended up working for a think tank, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, at the same time as Secretary Kerry had wrapped up his time as Secretary of State and was then coming to the Carnegie Endowment to also be a part-time distinguished scholar there. I got to know him a little bit at a time when he was pivoting from being Secretary of State to being focused on climate issues 100% of his time. And I got to see firsthand that his dedication to this issue, his single-mindedness on finding solutions rather than just admiring the problem. And I was incredibly impressed by the way he's able to balance a decades-long history of involvement in these issues and knowledge and experience in these issues with a youthful sort of energy that he brings to, traveling all around the world, holding hands with countries, helping to walk them through raising their ambition and taking actions to follow through on that. So when the Biden administration was formed, when Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Kerry was named to his role, I was very honored to get the call to join the team. And I've been working on a variety of different issues for him since, on the intersection of trade and climate, international economic issues like the G7 and the G20 in our climate agenda, and of course some of the special initiatives that we've had that have also recruited other countries in the private sector that I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David. Wow. I really want to read your thesis, by the way. So if you could send that over to me, I'm really interested in the formation of the Kyoto Protocol, more from a legal standpoint, because my mom and dad are were land use attorneys. They're no longer practicing. And I've come from a family of lawyers, so I'm really interested in like the provisions of the Paris Agreement and what led countries to abide to it. So if you could send that to me, that'd be amazing. I'd love to read it. I learn something new about you every time we hang out.
It's prescribed by doctors as a sleep aid, so I can make sure to get you a prescription.
Yeah, no, I love to read. I like reading what other people might consider boring. I find very fascinating and very needed. Well, I want you to talk a little bit. I mean, I know we'll go over a few different things that you're working on with the presidential envoy. But first, I was wondering if you could more broadly talk about ag as a solution to climate change and the intersection between pollinators, food security, climate and national security with this issue.
Absolutely. One of the sectors that, as you noted, that I work on is indeed agriculture, and it's an overlooked sector in many ways. A lot of people think first about the energy sector when they think about climate action, and in fact, they think about this notion of the energy transition when they think about climate change. And though the energy sector is incredibly important and indeed interconnected to so many other sectors, we need a transition, and a thoughtful and constructive transition across numerous sectors, including agriculture. Think about the ways that agriculture is connected to climate, right? It's both a exacerbator of the climate crisis, or it has its own emissions profile. When you think about modern agriculture, the role of fertilizers, the role of diesel-run farm equipment, et cetera. But it's also a victim of climate change. It's on the front lines of the climate crisis. Farmers and ranchers, especially in the developing world, are often the hardest hit and the first hit by climate crises, be it drought, be it excessive rainfall, as we've seen in parts of the Midwest over the past several years, be it rising food prices and scarce access to fertilizers and farm inputs that threaten the food security of countries around the world. We see this even in of this year's climate conference. Egypt, which will be hosting COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. Egypt is one of the world's largest importers of wheat, and due to ongoing climate disruptions that are leading to a record low wheat harvest in places like China, but also the disruptions of Russia's further invasion of Ukraine, we're seeing significant impacts to food security in food importing nations like Egypt. So it's important that our efforts to address the agriculture sector are balanced in a thoughtful manner between addressing the emissions of the agriculture sector and addressing adaptation. For that, we've put together an initiative called the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate. We call it AIM for Climate, or AIM4C for short. And the whole idea here is that it's a sensitive area to talk about. For a lot of countries, the agriculture sector is very politically sensitive, politically important, and with good reason, because farmers and ranchers and agricultural workers are the true lifeblood and the backbone of so many economies and of our livelihoods around the world. And so we're focusing on innovation in a broad sense, research and development, but also demonstration and deployment as a way to expand the frontier of possibilities, so that there's not a trade-off between climate action in the agriculture sector and food security, but we can actually enhance both at the same time by reducing the reliance on diesel, by introducing electrified farm equipment, for example, using solar PV, agrivoltaics, as it's called, into actual farming systems. So you can get smart shade and off-grid some of the agricultural operations at the same time, or just introducing lower carbon fertilizers or drought-resistant crops, for example. So we're very focused on that. We launched it. President Biden launched this at COP26 last year. We now, more than 40 countries, more than 180 government and non-government partners in total. And we've already mobilized $4 billion worth of new investment in climate smart ag innovation. We're looking to double that amount by the time we go to Egypt later this year.
Awesome. That's really great. As regenerative ag can really hold so much carbon and sequester it from the atmosphere. And while we need to electrify and move away from fossil fuel infrastructure, we also need to draw down that atmospheric carbon. So I see the soil really is a vital carbon sink. And I've been researching too on the different like fungal R&D like startups that you can. I don't know if you've come across those that you can spray on crops and like endophytic spores of fungi that can help crops become more resilient to heat spikes and frost. And I'm just wondering what types of innovation have you come across on the farming side of things?
Julie, this is such an exciting space. And actually, to your point, I like to say that we'll be successful if at the end of this 5-year initiative, so it runs through 2025, the Agriculture Innovation Climate, I like to say that we'll be successful if when I say clean tech, you think not just about wind turbines and solar panels and electric vehicles like Tesla, but you also think about the food tech and the ag tech innovation out there, because there's incredible innovation on in this space. We need to get more venture capital going towards it. We need to get more government investment in it. But there are, there are low carbon fertilizer companies that are creating fertilizers using CO2 sucked out of the air. So not only are they removing CO2, but they're actually putting that into a productive use, which reduces our need to have fertilizers that come from natural gas or natural gas products, like nitrogen fertilizers, for example.
Yeah. And nitrous oxide too, as a greenhouse gas emission, is far more potent than CO2, and we really need a replacement for that, for nitrous oxide or nitrogen inputs.
Absolutely. There are alternative proteins, right, that offer not just benefits in terms of animal welfare and in terms of local environmental impact, but also offer benefits in terms of emissions and greenhouse gas emissions impact. There are also new new forms of feed that you can give cattle that significantly reduce methane emissions from cattle, just using things readily available like seaweed, for example, that's also super high in nutrients. Cattle. So there's plenty of solutions out there, from the very high tech that's taking place in a lab to the sort of solutions and innovations that have been around for decades, but have not been processes deployed at scale. Again, regenerative agriculture, some of the smallholder farmer solutions that we see that it can increase yields and improve soil health and carbon uptake in the soil. So we're looking to be very open-minded in supporting all of these across the board, and doing so in a way that speaks to the needs of individual countries and regions. To give you an example here, our partner in Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, our co-lead, is the United Arab Emirates. And you might say, wow, what an odd United States, UAE, right? A bountiful major food producer and exporter in North America, and a small food insecure importer in the Gulf. But what we both have in common is a real focus on innovation and a desire to help push towards the food systems and the agriculture systems of the future. So when you go to the UAE, they're doing incredible things with vertical farming and controlled agriculture, where they're able to use a tenth of the water that's used in outdoor farming. And to do that in a desert environment like the Gulf, they're able to use far fewer CO2 emissions, and even take the CO2 emissions of greenhouse agriculture and use it in a circular economy sort of way. And then that's going to look totally different than the sort of innovations we need for a Bangladesh or in Brazil, for example. So that's the other exciting thing, is innovation isn't abstract. It's always contextualized in cultures and in microclimates and in societies that have particular needs and idiosyncrasies.
What I find really fascinating about this partnership too is the UAE really is going to be experiencing a lot of the impacts of climate change, as it's in the desert, and the desertification, and also like it's like one of the most challenging environments, I think, from a water scarcity standpoint, from a food abundance standpoint. Can you speak a little bit to how they're dealing with adaptation with farming?
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. I mean, some studies suggest that global warming of the Earth's surface temperature is occurring twice as fast towards the median latitude of the Earth. So in the Gulf region, it's occurring twice as fast as in other parts of the world. That means that these folks are indeed literally on the front lines of the climate crisis and have a lot to lose if they're not smart about adaptation and resilience investments. You see that
Mhm.
they're going about investing in a robust food security strategy. The UAE, as well as several of its neighbors, have really embraced climate adaptation, in particular in the agricultural sector. That's a combination of investing in crops that are hardy and resistant to warming temperatures. Think
Mhm.
ahead 10 years, 20 years ahead in terms of aquaculture as well. There,
Mhm.
protein comes from aquaculture rather than, of course, cattle or
Mhm.
crops. And so they need to be thoughtful as well about how are they evolving their aquaculture approach to a ambient water temperature off their shores. It's probably going to increase slightly over time. And then
Yeah.
things like aquaculture, waste or byproduct, and use that to help, let's say, grow drought-resistant crops like jatropha that can then yield not only food potentially, but also oils that could be used as low-carbon aviation fuels. So I actually visited a spot that Etihad is invested in outside of Abu Dhabi, where they're trying to do both aquaculture and some low carbon biofuels in a controlled system that uses very little water and does a lot of wastewater recycling. That's fascinating. And so if these things can be not only proven, but then the key thing is that they can be scaled. That's what we need to do in the next 10 years because the climate's not going to wait for us to wake up to the need to invest in innovation. We have to start doing it now
Yeah.
life cycle if we want some of these solutions ready from the year 2030 onwards.
Awesome. I absolutely agree. And as you know, I lost my home to the Kincaid fire, so I've experienced it out here from your hometown as well. The impacts, because the fires are just getting more and more frequent. They're burning a lot hotter, and it's just been really devastating to see the impacts. And so that's what really pushed me and galvanized me to focus on the solution side of things. So I'm always refreshed, like when I find solutionists and people focused on solutions to mitigate the worst impacts of the climate crisis, because we're so inundated with a lot of doom and gloom, and a lot of people feel really overwhelmed, really hopeless, like they aren't going to have a future. And a lot of people just aren't really privy to what solutions are out there. And I do believe in human ingenuity, and that we're good as a species at coming together at the ninth hour, um, with a crisis, even if we should have taken action a long time ago. Um, I'm wondering what I know this is going to be kind of a difficult question to answer, but do you feel, based on what you're seeing with the solutions you've come across, do you feel like we will be able to turn this crisis around in time to preserve a livable planet for future generations?
Julia, I really do hope so. And I'll tell you, I choose to focus on some of the success stories and some of the positive signals that we see.
Yeah.
So think back to what I like to do is think back to, let's say, just 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when the Paris Agreement was signed. I mean, the great success of the Paris Agreement was simply agreeing that countries would, on a voluntary basis, every year come together to talk about climate, take stock of the climate crisis, and that every few years they would come together with new voluntary climate commitments on what they were going to do to address the climate crisis and what they were going to do to reduce emissions. Now, that was considered a landmark success at the time, and it was. But
Mhm.
only 5 or 6 years later, not only would the United States, Japan, Canada, the EU, many other countries have a 2030 emissions reduction target of around 50% of all of their greenhouse gas emissions, 50% of carbon reductions by 2030. Not only would that be the case, but you would have several around the world also with very aggressive emissions reduction targets. You would have a major oil producer in the Gulf like the UAE that would come forward with a net zero 2050 target, a commitment to reach net zero by 2050, or that you would have South Africa working hand in hand with a range of different governments and philanthropic players to try and transition its coal economy away from coal in a way to preserve jobs. All of these are actually not just givens. That's not the natural direction of travel. That takes political will. That takes sacrifice. That takes political capital to achieve. And so the fact that we have come that far and we already have made those commitments less than a decade after the signing of the Paris Agreement does give me significant hope. The other thing that gives me significant hope is that a lot of people would say the current moment we're facing, high fossil fuel prices, volatile fossil fuel prices, an energy security crisis in many countries and regions around the world, emanating not only from supply chain disruptions, but also from, again, Russia's further invasion of Ukraine, that all of this would augur that, oh, climate change is a distraction. Climate change is losing focus. I agree. It's quite to the contrary. We may not be saying climate as much, or leaders may not be saying climate in their speeches as much in as many circumstances. But in a way, the natural response that many countries are going to have to this moment, diversifying their energy systems,
Yes,
or green sources of growth, looking to reduce their reliance on volatile hydrocarbon prices, volatile fossil fuel prices, all of that to lead them towards actions that even if they're motivated by energy security or by economic prosperity and affordability, they're going to end up decarbonizing their economies. They're going to lean into clean energy opportunities. And that's going to be good for our, what we need to do to fight the climate crisis as well. So I do not say we need to balance addressing energy security with addressing climate. They are use those strategies together so that they're one. And there are going to be ups and downs. The energy transition is not the flick of a switch. It is not a black and white thing. But I do think that of the ups and downs, we're heading in the right direction, and we just need to make sure that we maintain our focus and don't fall into the trap of thinking about things as some false choice or false dichotomy.
Yeah, thank you so much for addressing that, and energy security as well. As you know, you spoke to the team on this, but we're working on the Clean Energy Freedom campaign, and it feels like there's just a lack of jobs. So we're really wanting to galvanize people to do to sign up for clean energy jobs, for renewable energy infrastructure within our country, and we're getting some momentum behind the campaign, which is really exciting. But I feel like the climate crisis has been really politicized in this country. And so to work with a former Iraqi war, a vet named Kevin Johnson on this, and the vet community really calling upon us to take bolder action is really great to see that they're also, it's not your traditional environmental group. So it's been really great to work with this whole community of vets in our country to transition our economy. And I look forward to continuing those conversations with you. I know the team was really excited to talk to you about that.
Absolutely. Kevin is terrific, and the work he's doing is so important. And I'll just point out, our veteran community is some of the most valuable human capital and talent that we have to help drive the energy transition. These are extremely capable, extremely dedicated, extremely reliable, mission-oriented individuals, have so much to offer to whatever sector they go in, but they're a particularly tremendous fit for the clean energy sector in all sorts of jobs, from the digital side of thinking about how do we make sure our grids are more flexible, more secure, more resilient to cyber and extreme weather events, all the way, the manufacturing of advanced solar equipment, to batteries, to thinking about, get those supply chains back to the United States and going so that we have more and more Americans that, employed in the production of these clean energy technologies. I think vets have a ton to offer, and I'm just really excited by what Kevin is doing on that front.
Yeah, I actually went and explored this title. It's a title startup. I think they were in a Series A round, where they were saying if scaled around the US, this technology could supply, hypothetically, if scaled up around the coast, a quarter of the US's energy supply, with this technology. I'm wondering if you've come across any, like, I know that usually it's like photovoltaics and wind and geothermal and even nuclear, which I know is controversial in a lot of ways. But have you come across tidal or any of the um, other sources of energy like that?
I have looked a little bit at tidal, at ocean thermal, or OTEC as they call it, and
Yeah.
then we think of solar and wind as mature, and there are some mature elements of those technologies. There's also a lot of exciting stuff going on in the next generation of innovation that we need to see in solar and wind. So we should not just be satisfied with today's solar PV. We
Yeah.
should be excited about the next generation of multi-junction cells, of solar perovskites. Think about solar that you could literally print on a computer at home and apply to the side of a building, or paint onto your car or something like that. Thin, flexible, and flexibly manufactured, distributed manufacturing of thin solar PV. That's the future offered by perovskite solar. The United States, by the way, has several companies and researchers that are doing some of the leading research on this. So it's an area where we probably own more of the value than, let's say, other economies around the world that have dominated more traditional solar. Or I think about offshore wind. It used to be that these turbines were large, but were still within scale to a person. But we're able to now build bigger and bigger turbines further and further offshore, so they're not interrupting anyone's view or anyone's coastline, as there used to be concern about.
Yeah.
The size of they're generating as much power now, some of these offshore wind fields, as small nuclear plants. And I will note that the recent auction for offshore wind acreage, which took place off of New York, was the largest offshore energy sale in U.S. history, larger than any single offshore oil and gas auction that's ever taken place. And it's one of the very first major offshore wind auctions in the U.S. So that's exciting when you think about just the scale of investment. It's not alternative energy that we're talking about anymore. We are talking about mainstream energy. The alternative is the traditional energy that we're slowly pivoting away from, or that we're investing in to make it compatible with a climate future.
Yeah.
Energy is clean energy today. When you've got 80-90% of all new investment going towards it, that's another good sign that makes me hopeful.
Awesome. Yeah, I love how solutions proactive you are, because usually when people think of government, they think slow moving, bureaucratic, and like, of course, there's frustrations with like the pace of things sometimes. But what I found refreshing about talking to you and meeting with you is you are so steeped in knowledge on the climate crisis, and also the solution side of things, which is the area that I'm just focused on specifically. Okay, we know the problem, we know the timeline, we know the science, but here are the solutions. They need to be scaled, they need more funding, they need more community, and they need more public awareness around them, so the public doesn't feel like despairing about the future. And so hearing from you, I think, will give some people comfort that you really are committed to the solution side of things, both on a R&D tech side, and also, we didn't even go into the First Movers Coalition, but also on the regenerative, climate smart ag. And I know we're almost out of time, but circling it back to ag, because it's World Pollinators Day, um, I'm wondering if you guys are focusing on, and if you could close saying a little bit about pollinators. I know that, like, usually you and I talk about R&D around tech and electric tractors and ag, but pollinators really are vital to food supply, and we're experiencing colony collapse disorder. And I've seen some innovation around um, helping bees become more resilient with mushroom feed for bees, and scaling that up. I think Google's working on a project on that. But have you seen any innovation around pollinators in particular?
On pollinators in particular, I'm familiar with some of the projects that you just referred to, and I'm excited actually to learn more about those. And I'd love to go visit and see it in action. Um, a lot of these, again, are not high tech solutions. These are ultimately actually low tech, but extremely impactful and affordable ways to improve our food systems. And just as you noted, it's World Pollinators Day, so it's a good reminder not just about the role of pollinators in the agriculture sector, but it's a good reminder just of what we ultimately are addressing with the climate crisis and the climate challenge is the interconnectedness of things. The butterfly that if you're mindless and unthinking in depleting resources in one place, or thinking with short-termism in one area that you think is isolated from the rest, you quickly find out how interconnected it is to the entire chain of other things, to the entire food web, for example. And you get these cascading effects, these cascading failures that we have to work hard to avoid. So it means everything we do, we need to take a systems approach. We need to have systems thinking instead of just rigid boxes. That's what we're trying to do in our office, right? And you noted trying to bring that systems thinking and the civic responsibility of government, but connect it to moving at the speed of the private sector, not of government. So you mentioned coalition. I'll just say one final thing, as I know our time is drawing to a close. Please stay tuned all for next week. We'll be at the World Economic Forum with Secretary Kerry. And at the World Economic Forum annual meeting, we're going to be making some major announcements about some further advancement of this first movers coalition we have that's creating demand for green products with the largest companies in the world, and committing them to purchase green steel, green cement, green aviation fuels, green chemicals and concrete in a way that creates a demand signal that suppliers can go invest towards, and where the financial sector will lower the cost of capital for the green solutions rather than the business as usual. So we'll be making, again, some major announcements. I can't tell you exactly what they are yet because those are embargoed for a few more days. But let's just put it this way. We will have companies representing trillions of dollars, making new commitments worth billions of dollars. And we're also going to be announcing governments worth a significant amount of global GDP that are going to be allying with us in this effort. So stay tuned next week, and you'll see another initiative that we have where, again, we're trying to bring that systems thinking about how we change things for the better, but we're trying to do it at the speed of the private sector.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And yeah, I'm excited about the innovation in aviation around electrification of aircrafts as well, and that, like the beta testing of that. I mean, there's so much happening that people aren't necessarily privy to on a day-to-day basis. That gives me a lot of hope. Even if it is super dire, the speed of innovation is happening at warp speed. At the same time, in terms of honoring pollinators and closing it out, I really am a fan of earth-based solutions to the climate crisis and biodiversity loss and the preservation of keystone species. And so would love to work with you or commit to protecting pollinators, or at least exploring that. What does that look like? What's the innovation around pollinator protection to honor pollinators on this day?
Absolutely. Well, let's make that an ongoing conversation and something that actually we can work to bring into the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate. It's an important area.
Yeah.
To you here on this Pollinators Day, that's something we're going to work on over the rest of 2022 and try and get together that will be exciting for the climate conference COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt later this year.
Awesome. And yeah, from the California Department of Food and Ag board too, I would love to work with that board on this as well. And I'm not going to see you in Davos. I'm actually going to a few events down in Los Angeles, but I'm going to be tuning in for your exciting updates, and I'm wishing you all the luck there and at Davos conference. And thank you so much, David, for tuning in. And yeah, always love talking to you.
Thank you for everything that you do. And grounded team as well. Keep it up. We need these sorts of solution centers, and I love what you do to call people in rather than call people out. So keep it up. Keep up the good work, and thanks for everything that you do.
Thank you, David. I'll see you later. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. Bye. Thanks, everyone.